Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Bright Brains podcast. Today, we're honored to have Felicity Azura join us. Felicity wears many hats. She's a podcast host, a professional cuddler, and an exotic dancer. But beyond her diverse talents, Felicity is passionate about shedding light on important issues, particularly the impact of historical events on marginalized communities. Today, she's here to discuss the often overlooked repercussions of the annexation of Guam as a U.S. territory on the indigenous Chamorro people. Please join me in welcoming Felicity to the show. Welcome, Felicity.
Thank you so much, Isaac, for having me. I am looking forward to our discussion today.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it as well because I actually don't know anything about Guam. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you came to know about this issue.
Well, history was my favorite subject when I was still attending public school. And despite learning about world history, I don't recall ever learning about how the United States annexed their numerous territories. I know that Texas used to be annexed, but that's now an official state. But I seldom hear about this part of history being shared in US history courses. And so it wasn't until I was a college student, I took an environmental justice class, and I learned about how the United States bombed not only Japan, but islands in Micronesia, notably the Marshall Islands, which is, I believe, a short plane ride away. I've never been to the Marshall Islands. I would love to. I have been to Guam only once in my life, and that was May of 2022. And that was to visit my boyfriend's mother.
All right. So you said they bombed an island in Micronesia. There's one island I've heard about called, I think it's called the Bikini Atoll. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
that?
the Bikini Atoll. I've
Yeah,
absolutely heard of it.
that story about that island, man, it's so, I don't even have the words to describe how horrible it was. To people listening who don't know, basically the United States dropped a nuclear bomb on that island, told the people they had to leave, and basically destroyed their whole island. You know, crazy, crazy thing. So let's talk about Guam. So you said you're currently moving to Guam.
I am moving to Guam in early May. So a little over a week of recording.
All right, then that's awesome. And you said your boyfriend is from Guam, and is that how you became to know about the Chamorro people and the issues that they face?
So I live in a part of California that does not have that many Pacific Islanders in general. I think in my high school, I had only one Chamorro classmate. And mind you, there were 4,000 children at my high school.
Oh,
That's a
wow.
lot of kids. And for only one person whom I can recall being Chamorro, the odds are bleak. And even when I was in college, I think so. I went to a very large college, like definitely over, oh gosh, I don't want to fudge this, but I'm pretty sure over 10,000 students were enrolled at any point. And I think there was literally only one Marshallese person. So, so out of thousands and thousands and thousands of students, and mind you, we're a very international friendly type of college. I could only remember one student being from the Marshall Islands. And so I I didn't care of the plights that Chamorro people faced because I wasn't taught, I wasn't given proper education when I was in grade school, and I didn't personally know. I wasn't personally friends with anyone from the Marianas. It really was not until I met my boyfriend did I really start educating myself.
Yeah, it's crazy. They don't really tell us about the atrocities that America has committed. They barely even really talk about slavery and Hawaii, which the history of Hawaii and how they basically got taken over. To anybody listening right now, I would say look that up because it's crazy. They had a whole royal family there, and they basically just disposed them. But let's talk about Guam and the history of the annexation and the history of the people. So, how did Guam become a territory of the United States?
Well, hundreds of years ago, Magellan from Portugal visited Guam. That's a very polite way of saying it. And then eventually, after a bunch of different white colonizers visited Guam, Japan took over because Japan was trying to colonize the entire Pacific Ocean. And then the United States, quote unquote, liberated Guam last century. And the most celebrated holiday in Guam is U.S. Liberation Day. Um, a lot of the younger folks on Guam don't like celebrating that because, well, it's comparable to
Columbus Day.
celebrating Thanksgiving. And the history of Thanksgiving is pretty horrific. And so a lot of the younger folk believe, well, why should I celebrate this? Why should I observe this holiday when um, Guam and every other US territory is being extremely disenfranchised?
Yeah. So, what are some ways in which the people of Guam have been disenfranchised by the United States?
I'm glad you asked because the oppression is very similar to what Native Hawaiians in Hawaii experience, in that, for example, prior to US imperialism, there was enough food in the jungles to last people a long time. And now that US corporations and corporations in parts of Asia have taken over Guam, there's not much, breadfruit and other kinds of local food growing. And so Chamorro people are heavily reliant on exports, not just for food, but for hygiene products. And I don't remember exactly when the Jones Act was passed, but when the Jones Act was enacted, it stated that every export to Guam has to touch um, the west coast of the United States. And Guam is very close to the Philippines and China and Vietnam. And so all all the electronics, all the hygiene products, everything, even if it's being shipped from China, it literally has to go all the way to California and then all the way back to Guam. And so there's not that much variety of things like soap to choose from. And even then, it's extremely expensive because it, it it had to go on a very unnecessarily long route to get there in the first place. And if Guam was a respected sovereign nation, they would be able to trade with nearby other sovereign states and not have to do that ridiculous debacle that's only going to force um, underpaid people to have to pay more for things that are necessities, like the rent in Guam, I believe, is the same as in San Francisco, where I live. San Francisco is ridiculously expensive, but at the very least, there's way more job opportunities in San Francisco. The job opportunities in Guam are pretty much tourism and the military. It's really hard to get a job outside of those industries, much less a job that pays a livable wage.
So the Jones Act, why did they do that? Were they just racism, just screwing over the people of Guam, or was there some sort of reason why they gave why the items had to touch the West Coast first?
I I believe over 100 years ago, a US politician who was pretty racist even believed that the territory status of Guam should be temporary. But that that clause wasn't really enforced. And so even today, it's still designated a territory. When you look at Hong Kong, like Hong Kong lost the Opium War in 1899. And so um, Great Britain was like, okay, we're going to make Hong Kong our colony for 100 years. And then 1999 came and Hong Kong was no longer a British colony. So it yes, treaties are good, but they need to be enforced. You can't just write your name and just say to hell with it.
So let's talk about one thing you mentioned in our email exchanges was pollution. You said the US military pollutes on the island a lot.
Japan and the US both pollute the Pacific Ocean. And you know what? France also France has also polluted the absolute crap out of the Pacific Ocean. A lot of it is nuclear waste. And I hear that a majority of the recycling in mainland United States is just shipped over to other countries. Let's make it their problem to sort through our rubbish. And so what the United States does with recycling is comparable to what they do with nuclear waste. Like let's dump it in the ocean. Let's make it somebody else's problem. And there are a lot of environmental justice summits where a bunch of leaders from different countries get together in the same room and they negotiate. And then you have to get, a majority vote to pass something. But it's very depressing to know that the United States, Great Britain, and France are on the wrong side of pretty much every vote that has to do with justice for indigenous people.
Yeah, the whole dumping of nuclear waste into the ocean, man, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. Like
Yeah,
we
it
need,
affects the food supply. It affects the food chain. Like you learned about the food webs and all that in school, right? We can't
yeah,
keep doing this.
exactly. It's wild. So have there been any efforts or movements aimed at addressing the historical injustice faced by the people of Guam?
I criticize academia heavily because I've had negative experiences in academia. That being said, I believe that professors of Pacific universities like University of Guam, University of Hawaii, I believe the professors there are doing the damn thing. They are on top of creating syllabi for their students. They're giving speeches at the United Nations. They're publishing anthologies written by various Pacific poets. They're doing so much, but they are underpraised. For example, May is considered Asian American Pacific Islander month, but a majority of the time, people recommend books just written by East Asian authors. And I'm sure there are great, wonderful books out there written by East Asian people, but a lot of Asian people speak over Pacific Islanders. And that is why a lot of Pacific Islanders don't like the label AAPI. They believe that it's too broad. And I completely agree. I write essays in my free time, and part of that is looking up statistics for various demographics of people. And it's very frustrating as a Chinese American finding statistics on stuff like housing and education, healthcare, and Asian people are not mentioned at all, or they're just like white, Hispanic, Black, and then AAPI. And when you look at college acceptance in California, it's very, very clear to me that these fancy institutions are letting mostly like Chinese, Vietnamese, Indian students pursue whatever their hearts desire at the school. But they reject, like Chamorro students from attending. And they'll say, wow, we're doing so well in terms of diversity. We are so inclusive. Look at all these AAPI students. And it's really just like rich, like East Asian people. And you don't really get equitable amounts of Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, with these acronyms like AAPI, and there's another acronym called BIPOC, which is like Black Indigenous People of Color, which I hate that acronym as
Me
well
too.
because, it lumps people together. And don't get me wrong, being people of color, we do have certain things that we share, but we also have different issues. And I think they do that on purpose
Oh
to
yeah.
cover up issues and get people to not focus on things. So, for example, we talk about the people of Guam and how they're not having their needs met. If people knew about that, they might raise a stink. So instead, they say AAPI, and that way they can use rich Asians as the face of all, Asian and Pacific Islanders, even though, being in California, there are Asian people and Pacific Islander people dealing with homelessness and things like that. But the way the media portrays it, you would never know. What are some issues also pertaining to the island of Guam that gets covered up and not talked about?
I cannot stress enough how much the US military has Guam and American Samoa in a chokehold, because it's one of the few jobs that you can get there. And when you go to a Kmart in Guam, the prices for things like soap is more expensive than if you were to go to a convenience store on the military base in Guam. And so people, they're incentivized. They're like, I don't want to have to pay a ridiculous amount of money just for groceries. So I guess I'll enroll in the military, because the grocery stores on the military bases are cheaper. And it sucks because, as wonderful as college can be, not everyone is cut out for college. Like, I don't think I'm cut out for college. When my boyfriend was in high school, he was like, oh no, what am I going to do? Do I have to join the military? Do I have to get a minimum wage job that's going to require me to walk 3 miles one way in the 100-degree Fahrenheit heat? And I I'm just so glad that he was like, you know what, fuck that shit. I'm not joining the military. I'm gonna enroll in University of Guam. And then he transferred to California and then we met. But that's the thing. The education system in Guam is not that good. And yes, overall, education could be a lot better in the United States, but it's severely worse in US territories. For example, when I asked him what the sex education is like over there, he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure we were taught about consent, but I don't really remember when we were taught about consent because I most vividly remember being shown graphic photos of um, STIs and like a really explicit graphic video of somebody giving birth, and that was their sex education. And it's and so I I'm just so glad that college worked out for him. University of Guam's acceptance rate is 100%, and I think every community college acceptance rate should be 100%. And you invest in the things you value and you police what you don't value. Since the schools in Guam are underfunded, that means education isn't really valued. And that breaks my heart because Pacific universities have so many degrees that you cannot get outside of Oceania. Like, I'm pretty sure you have to attend a school in Oceania if you want a degree in Pacific studies. At my college, I majored in ethnic LGBT studies, which is a pretty rare degree. And um, I had several options. I could major in like Asian LGBT studies. I could major in Latino LGBT studies, Black LGBT studies, but you know, Pacific studies or Pacific LGBT studies was not offered at my college, despite me attending a college that honestly offered really rare degrees.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but are you looking to reach a dynamic and engaged audience of curious minds? Well, look no further. Bright Brains Podcast is the perfect platform to showcase your business or product. You'll be able to reach a diverse, intelligent audience and engage with listeners passionate about personal development, technology, and more. Elevate your brand through thought-provoking discussions. Don't miss this opportunity to promote your business on one of the fastest growing podcasts in the market. Contact us today to discuss advertising options and elevate your brand to the next level. Contact us at brightbrainspod@gmail.com to secure your advertising spot on Bright Brains today. Again, that's Bright Brains with a Z, pod, P-O-D, @gmail.com. Now, back to the podcast. Yeah, college, I have mixed feelings about college. On one hand, I feel like it's kind of a scam. I feel like it's kind of, you can go to college and you can learn a lot and it can help you. But at the
Mhm.
same time, with this whole student loan system, you go to college, you go in debt, and then
Mhm.
it's kind of like it's a way of controlling people,
Oh
because then
yeah.
you have to make sure you get a job and make these payments, which hinder you from advancing in life. Which I'm dealing with student loan debt, and what's interesting, right? I used to work for a company collecting on defaulted student loans, and it really opened up my eyes to the poverty that Native Hawaiians live in because, we would have to work with them and get their financial information. And I had genuinely no idea. And I don't think a lot of Americans really know about the plight of Pacific Islanders and how they live. One thing you mentioned in our email exchanges is that they aren't able to vote for president, even though they have to follow our laws.
That is just so unfair because there are US astronauts who are, literally on the moon or in the International Space Station that were able to cast in their vote for who they wanted to be president. But, people in Puerto Rico, people in the US Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and Guam, they're not allowed to vote for president. And they get to have governors, they get to have representatives in Congress, but they're just there to say what they want to say. It's like, okay, thank you for stating or thank you for testifying, but you can't vote. So it's so messed up because there's this viral clip of, I don't remember who the politician is, but there's this viral clip of a of this really old white guy in uh Congress who's introducing the representative of American Samoa, and he mispronounces. He's like American Samoa. Like, the thing is, people from American Samoa, people assume, oh, you mean like Somalia? And when people from Guam go to California and they share where they're from, people are like, you mean Guadalajara or like Guatemala? Like, I've never heard of that. And it's this really frustrating thing that they have to deal with. And so when I tell other people my boyfriend's Chamorro, I say he's Chamorro. I don't really say he's from Guam. Not that Guam is a bad word. But the normal response I get is like, oh, are you a Navy wife? Are you like an Air Force wife? Or like a Marine girlfriend or something like that. They assume that the default person in Guam is uh, a member of the armed forces. They don't really assume that the default person in Guam is indigenous, which is annoying. So I say
Yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah, I can imagine. And then, going back to how the people, Chamorro people, have no say in Congress or in our elections, but the majority of them are in the armed services. So they could die. They could be sent over to some Muslim country that, hasn't really done anything to us to die, for these military companies who want to make a profit, but then they can't even vote, for
Mhm.
president. Yeah, it's wild. Um, are there any organizations that are doing good work on the island of Guam and helping the people? And what are they?
Thank you for asking. One podcast that I mentioned in our email is Fanachu, and I forget what Fanachu stands for. My bad. But Fanachu is a wonderful resource, and it is hosted by, I believe, a professor at University of Guam, and they also have a YouTube channel where they, of course, have podcast episodes, but they also have videos displaying different parts of Chamorro culture. And I I love listening to that podcast with my boyfriend. Well, he does get teary-eyed when we listen to it. So a part of me is like, oh, this is bringing up a lot of deep-seated generational trauma for him. But it's it's an important podcast. Please listen to it and support their Patreon. And in 2020, when everything was remote, the host of Fanachu podcast had, I believe, Zoom meetings every Friday that anybody could join, and he would teach you words in Chamorro, and that was entirely for free. Entirely for free. And I don't think he's doing it anymore due to low signups. So if people would like to learn how to speak the language, I implore you to do so. It's not on Duolingo, it's not on any of those um, language learning apps, but there are websites, there are YouTube channels, there are podcasts, there are social media pages, there are ways to learn the language. And I think it's important to keep the language alive. I mean, decades ago, very few people spoke Hawaiian fluently, and now a ton of indigenous Hawaiians are fluent, and we can do the exact same thing for Chamorro.
That's awesome. How can listeners who are not familiar with the history of the Chamorro people support efforts to raise awareness and promote justice for the community?
Fortunately, it's not only organizations on Guam who are dedicated to preserving Chamorro culture. There are a ton of organizations in California alone. And it's not just in San Diego, which has a sizable Chamorro population, but there are also some in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, Lottie Fest happened like a month ago, and I don't know about Chamorro organizations outside of California, but there are a ton in California, like Chelu and San Diego. And Chelu is honestly, it's like friend, but not the way you say par. Because there are some slang terms that are like bro and dude, and Chelu is it. I believe the connotation is a lot deeper, and so if someone calls you Chelu, that that should feel like an honor. And so there's the organization Chelu in San Diego. There's also I believe it's called the Sons and Daughters of San Diego, which um, is relevant because so San Diego has a sizable Chamorro population, largely because they have Veterans Affairs hospitals in San Diego. So this is sad. San Diego is 6,000 miles away from Guam, but the closest VA hospital to Guam is in San Diego.
Whoa.
Yeah, 6,000 miles. And so that means um, not just veterans, but anyone in Guam who needs like a serious surgery that the local hospital cannot perform, they literally have to take a 7-hour flight from Guam to Hawaii and then take a 4-hour flight from Hawaii to San Diego. Now, my boyfriend had, I believe, appendicitis when he was like 14 years old. And there's only one hospital on Guam, and uh, they were not able to get rid of his inflamed appendix. So he did have to fly 7 hours all the way to Hawaii. And just thank goodness there were medical staff in Hawaii who were able to treat his appendicitis.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So not only are there food and products costing a lot, if they have a medical emergency, they have to fly 7 or possibly 11 hours to get help. Yeah, that's insane. Jesus. So during our email correspondence, you mentioned something called the land back movement. What is that?
The land back movement is not a metaphor. It's quite literal. People like to portray colonization as something that happened a long time ago, like we're done with colonization. But unfortunately, I mean, just like with racism and misogyny, colonization has evolved. It has evolved in ways such as uh, getting rid of job opportunities in underserved communities, land back means giving land back to the stewards of said land. Land back is not specific to one tiny region of the world. It's a global movement. It is something I'm really passionate about because it's just needed everywhere. Like
Yeah.
there are Native American elders in the Appalachian Mountains literally handcuffing themselves to construction machinery to prevent the Appalachia from being desecrated because they are land defenders. And you know what? When I'm 80 years old, maybe I'm going to be doing that. My boyfriend probably does not. My boyfriend probably does not want me doing that, but it is the right thing to do. And when you are indigenous to land, you defend it. I mean, I did speak a lot about Palestine during our email exchange, and I spoke about West Papua because the Indonesian government is colonizing West Papua, and land back is relevant everywhere. It's relevant everywhere. And liberation cannot happen without international solidarity and solidarity within regions that are composed of varying cultures of people. And solidarity is so beautiful, and I wish there was more of it in our email exchange. I told you that my boyfriend didn't experience racism growing up, but he noticed a lot of prejudice amongst different groups of Pacific Islanders, and I live in California, so I absolutely notice a lot of racism and prejudice, and as of late, a lot of Islamophobia. And I do believe that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and the path to that is solidarity. And that is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it does keep me hopeful in times like these.
Yeah, what's going on in Palestine. That is, I don't even have the words to describe that. You know, I guess maybe I was naive to think that something like that couldn't happen in this day and age, but it is. I hop on TikTok and I see children starving, people being blown up, and the Western world, America, just turns a blind eye. In fact, we just gave them like 200 billion or something insane. Meanwhile, we have so many homeless people here in America. We have people who can't get their medicine, but we're giving bombs to blow up, you know, poor people in the
Yeah.
Middle East. And yeah, it's man, it's disgusting. But just saying disgusting, I feel like that's not even a strong enough word. I don't think there's a word in the English language to really, oh man, I don't know. But is there any other topics that we haven't touched on in regards to this issue? I know there's probably a whole lot more.
I will say I have a lot of Caribbean friends. For example, I have friends from Cuba, friends from Puerto Rico. Um, and what's great about them is that I don't see them be prejudiced against other Caribbean people. Like the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans that I know, they're besties, right? There's Caribbean solidarity from what I have observed. And so it would only make sense for there to be solidarity between Chamorro people and Taino people. So Taino are indigenous to the Caribbean. And I don't really see that solidarity amongst those from US territories. Like, this is not a jab at my boyfriend, whom I love, but like I hear Chamorro people complain like, oh my gosh, if I ask any person on the street to point to where Guam is on a map, I bet you they would be like, what? And and if you were to ask the same person, okay, point to the US Virgin Islands on a map, they'll be like, I forgot that was a thing. And it's like, as somebody who has a job that is highly misunderstood, that has inspired me to learn more about other jobs that are highly misunderstood. And so I just, I really, really wish there was more solidarity amongst residents of US territories. I told you that I got a job offer in Guam. That's why I'm moving there this summer. But another place I considered applying for work is the US Virgin Islands. And to my knowledge, English is the main language spoken there. Spanish is mostly spoken in Puerto Rico. I don't speak Spanish, sadly. And it honestly, it might be better for me to get a job at the US Virgin Islands because I speak English and English is the most commonly spoken language there. Meanwhile, Japanese and Korean are languages that are deeply emphasized in Guam. And I don't speak those languages. So wish me luck. I think I'm still going to make good money. But that's the thing. In school, yes, children are taught how to say, months of the year, days of the week in Chamorro. But that's pretty much it. They're pushed more to learn languages that are commonly spoken by tourists who visit Guam. And it sucks. I don't want a majority of Chamorro people to speak Japanese and Korean and only know how to say like days of the week in Chamorro. That sucks. And yeah, maybe I would make more money in the US Virgin Islands, but you know what? I feel strongly compelled to go to Guam. Not just because my boyfriend's mother lives there, but she's a lovely woman. But it's also, I just don't want to be one of the many, many white people who move to Guam and they're like, wow, the real estate here is so much cheaper. And I don't have to, deal with mass shootings because mass shootings aren't really a thing in Guam. I don't want to be one of those people who look at tropical places and be like, what a great place to retire. I am a settler. And to do what's right would be to make that shmoney, dollar bills, y'all, while I'm in Guam, and then help my boyfriend's mother pay for groceries because right now she's on welfare. I don't want her to be on welfare. I want her to have the many opportunities that I have in California. But she's not going to move. She's not going to move to the mainland anytime soon. And so I can go over to where she lives and help her cook, help her clean her house, take her car to the car wash for her, or just hand wash, or just hand wash her car for her because she did so much as a single mom raising my boyfriend all by herself. And I don't want her to die. I don't want her to die lonely and on welfare. I want to help out in any way I can. And my boyfriend has job obligations. He can't like move from California back to Guam permanently, but I can temporarily move there. and help her. And also do my best at learning about the cuisine, the fashion, the music, everything that settlers should know.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's beautiful. You seem very passionate about uh, the Chamorro people, and that passion really shows. It's awesome. It's good to see people fighting and standing up for others. Um, yeah, one reason why I do this podcast is to, there's so many topics out there that I just don't know about, and this was one of them. So I'm glad to be able to share your passion for the Chamorro people with my audience and spread awareness and hopefully create more solidarity. I feel like all people of color, although I don't like that term really, but people of color, they're Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, Chamorro. We've all been hurt in some way by this American government, and it just seems, even when America seems to not seek lower, it seems to sink lower. For example, the whole Palestine thing, and then we got Donald Trump seems to be on the horizon again. It's just this country, man. I really don't know. But that being said, do you have anything to promote? I know you have a podcast on of your own. Where can people go? What's it called? And do you have anything else you want to promote?
Pro Cuddle Hustle podcast, and it does it does feel a bit slimy to talk about all of these selfless things and then just promote myself. But I do talk to a lot of other people on my podcast. I like interviewing people with very misunderstood professions, and I do have one episode in which I research the snuggle industry in Oceania, and I mainly found stuff in Hawaii and New Zealand. There's very, very, very few touch practitioners in Oceania. I did tour Guam in 2022. Nobody booked me. Nobody booked me.
Nah.
Because, well, my theory is that not enough people know that this industry exists. And unless people know what it is.
So what is it? What is a professional cuddler?
Somebody who offers platonic touch as an occupation.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've honestly never heard of it. So when I heard that, I was like, that's interesting. But hey, you know what? I'm definitely going to check your podcast out, and I hope my audience does as well. And this has been a great conversation. I learned a lot. And thank you for your time, Felicity. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I am so grateful that you invited me onto your show to speak about this topic, which I do talk about it when I'm face to face with other people, but I don't normally talk about this in an interview setting. And not to degrade other people who have interviewed me, but most people who interview me, they're like, ooh, I want to talk about your job. Like, ooh, I don't often get to be in the presence of people with your job. And like, I get it. But people don't really ask me questions unrelated to my job. You're the first person, I think, who has done that all year. So thank you.
Hey, no problem. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Looks like I guess we're finished. Thanks again for coming on, and take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Good luck in Guam. All right. That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us for another enlightening conversation here on Bright Brains. I hope you've gained valuable insights and inspiration to fuel your own bright ideas. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform or however else you listen to this podcast. Also, we can be found on all major social media. Just type in Bright Brains with a Z. And remember, the brightest minds are those that never stop seeking knowledge.